Hey, Velina Mek Aloha, as we look and a review of all the readings and videos in regards to the historical piece. And so remember, especially for many of you from Hawaiian Studies 107, just kind of review, kind of capturing everything. With two, three parts to put this together as a way to kind of use as reference. But as we start, let's move forward. And here's an example of something I pulled out of the papers a long time ago, post so-called Hawaiian overthrow, right about 1898, 1897, when actually I should say 1898, at the conclusion of what's called the Spanish-American War, how Hawaii is also incorporated in its mythology of being part of a colonial colonized entity, along as you can see in the front row. You have the Philippines, Guam, and let me see, Puerto Rico. Yeah, along with Hawaii right here. And you can see, if you look at their faces, you can see they're unhappy, of course, because they were forcibly taken by the United States. You have Uncle Sab lecturing them, right, teaching, educating them, trying to civilize them. Look in a back room here, and you can see in the very back corner, you see a little, appears to be a Chinese person trying to enter into the door. And again, this is a real cartoon from a real United States newspaper at that time. But again, the idea that the Asians are trying to sneak in early has always been on the minds. It's called the yellow peril of white America. As you can see in this corner here, you have an American Indian, a native, who's sitting in a corner. You're reading, and if you can't see in this image here, but actually the book is upside down. It's caused the attempt to kind of show and dehumanize them as being backwards people. And of course, in the top left corner, look at what they have here. You have a black African person who's washing the windows. And so again, you can see in this kind of mythology of what America is all about. There's some truth many times, even in their own cartoons, on what so-called white America at that time were thinking. Yeah. So again, this is from an American so-called newspaper of that times, kind of showcasing the mentality of the United States at that times also. And if you take a look at the students here, all seeing good students, civilized, reading and learning, behaving and obeying. Yeah. Well, let me just kind of start off with my most favorite historian, Joseph Mokuohai Poi Poi, and from an article he wrote in Hawaiian language newspapers back in 1906, probably one of the most prolific Hawaiian historians and writers ever, if not for that time for sure. But writing for a paper, Kana'ia Puni, he was writing several stories at the same time, a daily paper. But there's a quote that I found when when I was teaching a class called Mo'olelo Hawaii Kaika, which means ancient Hawaiian history. And I took this quote because it really showcased how people like Poi Poi saw the intellect and the educational levels of our people and the power of our own so-called stories and literacies and songs. As he says, let it be known. We are a people with our own ancient history. That's kind of like the ancient people of Hellene. And the word Hellene, of course, refers to Helen, like Greek. So it's quickly comparing, a comparison, literary comparison with Greek literature. And of course, Greek literature is thought to be the classical European literature. It's kind of where all the classical ideas, philosophers and mathematicians and architecture comes from, the idea of this classic, where the best of the best came from. Well, Poi Poi says, well, we got some stuff that's kind of like theirs, but he says even better. Hemau mele kahiko ho'i. Our kupuna also had these ancient poets and ancient songs that's like theirs, but he says, but oyaku, the word oyaku, but even better than the best of what they get. And I always found this to be very, very powerful in showcasing that it's not that our people were just knowledgeable about Hawaii, but in fact, like Poi Poi is very knowledgeable what's going around the world and saw the beauty and the depth of our own histories and stories. And in comparison to the classical Greeks, says, their stuff is good, but our stuff is just as good, if not even better. And we got to think about in the Hawaiian consciousness, when you think about history, the idea of history, when do we start as a people? Well, as a people, we consider ourselves coming from the very beginning of time, from the creation of the cosmos. This is a familial relationship that we have with those from the ancients and this ancient cosmogony. Yeah, so Hemele Kumulipo, the ancient genealogical creation chants, which basically starts with O Keawi Kahuli Vela Kahonua O Keawi Kahuli Lole Kalani, the turning and churning of time and space and the flow, yeah, creates heat, Velak, and creates the celestial bodies, and so begins the cosmos. And at the very end of this 2000 plus chant, um, comes a human being. But it teaches us we have a familiar relationship with all that goes before us, all the way to the beginning of the stars. So we think about our consciousness as Kanaka, as Hawaiians. We don't begin in 1776. We don't begin in 1080. But the sense of we as even beings descend from all that before us, all the way to the beginning of the time itself, the cosmos. Yeah. So Kumulipo is again, it's his genealogical song, a prayer, which also talks about principles of evolution and talks about history and genealogy of how, in fact, the people got here. And so, what's the importance of these cosmogonies? And these cosmogonies, like the Kumulipo, these ancient songs of creation, provides us the kind of ways to see how we see the world. And we can look at language, for example, as one example, where culturally how our concepts are held by this knowledge that comes from words. And so in Hawaiian, right, we have a word like aina. But we should all realize, does aina equal real estate? And of course, you can see right there from those two words, we were talking about two different worldviews. Aina, of course, in the sense that we, as the people of the sand, have a familiar relationship with aina, that which feeds us, that's what nourishes us, which gives us life. Yeah. So when we talk about who we are, in fact, we come no hemai oi no. We come from the land itself. We are of the land itself. And so we have a familiar relationship with the Aina. Now the word real estate, of course, that goes back through European history. It goes all the way back to the interpretations of things like even like Genesis from the Bible. Right? If you think about the line in Genesis where it says, man shall have dominion, that kind of narrative and mentality, that the relationship of man to the environment was one as if the man had the right to dominate, dominion, to own and control, to commodify. So the way we look at these words, we can see even through language, the concepts are very, very different. Yeah, they are not congruent. Aina definitely does not mean real estate, and real estate, in fact, does not mean Aina. And we have many of our own cosmogonies, and this is just one of them, the story of Waki and Home. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but just to kind of show that we have these multiplicities of these so-called creation stories, which were never really meant to be seen perhaps as being factual historical. But again, these are lessons that have been passed on from the ancients to us, which also shows how we as people are connected to the food that we eat and from the food to the land. Yeah, as we say in Hawaiian, hanau ka aina, hanau ke ali'i, hanau ke kanaka. Yeah, born is the land and the chiefs did the people. Or um, uh, um, he ali'i ka aina, he ka wā ke kanaka. Land is like a chief, people are its servants. Yeah, so these mythologies, these narratives teach us a particular way to see ourselves in the world as being part of the world, yeah, being part of the so-called land. Now, in our histories, we also got to remember most of our history as humans has not been in Hawaii. And if we were to look at genetic DNA evidence, we would kind of find out that we think about Hawaiians as Pacific peoples, as so-called today called Polynesians. Yeah, that we had, been here roughly, as much as 2,000 years ago. And we know this by the kind of evidence you find in archaeology and the kind of, you know, testing that you can find from soil samples to radioactive materials and so forth. So we've been here for quite a while. We were in this area here. This is Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji about 3,000 years ago. And about 2,000 years ago, we started to leave. So these are our most, I would say, well, first cousins, of course, we Hawaii at the Marquesans, the Nukuhiva, the Tahitians, Society Islanders, the Maori of Aotearoa, Rarotonga, and all of these islands are called Outer Polynesia, really like first cousins. We're very, very similar, very, very similar language and culture. And then our secondary cousins, there, Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji, make up what we call Polynesia. Well, Polynesians have been around for several thousand years, but if we're going to go back, originally we have to go to the very beginning. Genetics, let's talk genetics. We know out of Africa, over 80,000 years ago, they believe the first big migrations out of Central East Africa, Southern Central East Africa, moved up, and eventually they came down through Madagascar, and they believe through southern India, and jumped into an area today called Sahul, which is ancient Southeast Asia, large landmass, and roughly about 60,000 years ago, they end up in places like even today we call Australia, and today we call them Melanesians, the dark Melanesian people who reside in this area. They were the first peoples to ever move out of the Pacific. Well, what's interesting, so they're one half of the genetics of today's Polynesians and hence Hawaiians. And then later, about only about 15,000 years ago, some say 18,000 years ago, some say even recent, the last great migration leaves Africa, heads up more north above Iran and comes around Nepal and through China, Mongolia, China, come down off of Taiwan, as you can see, and they make their way south. And these are a little more Asiatic, yeah, and they mix genetically. Yeah, we know through mitochondrial DNA, we mix genetically with the Melanesians, and they become, and they with what's called Lapita people, and they, right about 3,000 years ago, they end up in places like Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji, and for about 1,000 years, some improvements in sailing and other technologies probably, and they're off again, and eventually end up in places at the very end in Hawaii. So you think about Hawaiian history, it's a compilation of movement of our people for thousands and thousands of years. But we have been here again for quite a long time. We've been in the Pacific for a very long time. Yeah, so ancestrally, we come from the earliest Melanesians, and we come from the latest migrations of what later becomes the Lapita people. So when you look at the Moana Nui, for example, this is just a view of the Pacific. We got to remind the Pacific covers about a third of the planet. About a third of the planet. Hawaii is virtually almost into the center. So landscape-wise, you got to think there's something very special about just Hawaii's location. Yeah, location, location, location. And just to get here in the Middle Pacific, of course, was an extreme amount of work and time. But we're all related. Those are the Pacific peoples of Moana Nui are all, in a sense, related, not just physically or genetically, but also culturally, linguistically. Yeah, in many ways, we are one large people, the people of the Pacific. But we've been here for thousands and thousands of years. Well, one of the questions I get sometimes is, do we know which ancestors arrived in the islands? And we actually have several I can point at, but I'm just going to choose a couple of more famous ones. This is the story of Mo'ikeha, who in his story, in his particular prayer, talks about his so-called migration to Hawaii, his landing in Hawaii, and called Melea Kamahualele, where he compares the people of Hawaii with the children of Papanwakea, and also the connection to Tahiti, as you see in this line here. He kanaka Hawaii, he kanaka Hawaii, he kamanakahiki, a child of Tahiti. He puri imai tapa'ahu, royal descendants from Kapa'ahu, which is one of the districts in Tahiti, and so forth. So they're very clear that where we so the question of do we know where we came from? We've always known in our stories. Yeah. So we always known that we've had these kinds of our world is vast. Our world was not just limited to the Hawaiian Islands. Yeah, but our world was also connected to our ancient homelands, sometimes called kahiki. Other important migration ali'i, people like Hema Aikane, who eventually, Hema uh, was raised in Hana, yeah, Hema and Puna. So many of the various genealogies of chiefs come from Puna and Hema. In other words, Hana is being a kind of a central place for ancestral. All the ali'i come from those lands also. Another important figure in ancient history is the figure of Pa'ao. You're going to hear this name. Pa'ao was a very ancient ali'i, a chief, but he was really a kahuna, as we would say today. Yeah, he was a religious advisor, practitioner, and there's a long story of how he comes to Hawaii, and eventually what's important about his coming here is that he really brings a lot of change to these islands. With him, he comes and brings a lot of very strict protocols, kind of kapu or sacred ways in which the chiefs, the idea of the prostration kapu, even the ideas of kukailimoku, one of the ku gods that is given human blood as sacrifice, and others. Yeah, and so it's a very important. So we always talk many times. You may hear people talk about Pa'ao as kind of figure, and he came, probably about 11, 1200s, maybe later, but around about the 1200s. And a lot of times people say pre-Pa'ao and post-Pa'ao, because pre-Pa'ao society was less stratified. Yeah, with Pa'ao it became more hierarchical. And so, when we look at history in Hawaii, yeah, we generally kind of break it up into different pieces of pre-Wakia, very ancient history. This is generally kind of sense of, pre being here in these islands. Yeah. And then we have the early half of Wakia to Pa'au, the early settlements and colonizations and stories connected to these islands, very dark, ancient history. And then we have more recent history in a sense from the time of Pa'au to Kamehameha. And Kamehameha is a good date in that, during the time of Kamehameha, this is when uh, for example, Captain Cook arrives in these islands, Vancouver and others. We have the Hawaiian Kingdom period. Yeah, the Hawaiian Kingdom was an actually recognized, international recognized nation state. And then post Hawaiian Kingdom, generally today called the U.S. occupation period. Yeah, starting off with the territory of Hawaii and unto later, which is like today, the state of Hawaii. And of course, we know that the Hawaiian people had a traditional society in ancient times. Yeah, we have generally what we call the ali'i. Yeah, the aristocrats, the rulers of the islands. Yeah, the royals in a sense. You also have the kahuna class, with those who did the religious practices and ceremonies. Kind of have a lower class of both ali and kahuna. But the masses of people, yeah, or what today we call the maka ainana, maka ainana, the common Hawaiian, the common people of the land, the farmers, the fishermen. And again, traditional society, very much like traditional societies you find in other Polynesian and Pacific islands. Yeah. We commonly talk about in traditional ancient times, people talk about the four so-called main houses, and I always compare this, if you're familiar with um, Game of Thrones, for example. If they get House Lannister, they have the various kind of like lines of authority, or like aristocracy lines, I guess, or houses as they would call them. Sort of in the same way in Hawaii, yeah. And each of the main islands, so you have Moku o Keawe, the epitaph name, so the island of Keawe. So a lot of the Ali'i chiefs who come from Hawaii Island, yeah, come from the Keawe line. Maui Nui a Kamalalawalu, yeah, Great Maui a Kama. Yeah, and Maui, Great Maui includes not just the island of Maui, but also Kaho'olawe, was an ahupo of Maui, Molokai, Lanai, and of course Kaho'olawe, Maui, Lanai, yeah, four islands, yeah. Maui. O ahua kaku. And sometimes I should bring Molokai. O ahua kakuhi heva, yeah, o ahu. And then Kauai o Mano Kalanipo, which also included Nihao. So you kind of four main so-called chiefdoms that you would find early from ancient times. Yeah. We also had our traditional lands, and I'm sure many of you, have words like ahupua'a and moku and so forth. So these are the kinds of things, if you're not familiar with, make sure you review, because you'll hear them used over and over in class. But the idea is that the Hawaiian traditional land management system was its own. Yeah. In fact, even to this day, I will be clear, even to this day, even legal, how laws look and how you look at land tenure and land use today, the Hawaiian system is still very much a part of today's system in regards to a land title and so forth. So we generally talk about Ko Hawaii Pai Aina, the Hawaiian archipelago. Yeah. And it should include, of course, what today we call the Northwest Islands. I don't get too deep into the cultural part, but generally, um, after Ni'ihau, you have Nihoa, and then after Nihoa, between Nihoa and today we call Necker or Moku Manamana, was kind of seen like as it's like the boundary of the realm of this world. Yeah, when you go beyond past Nihoa, you start to get into like outside the outer realm. Yeah, so that's how our kupuna saw the Hawaiian Islands very much. Some on land tenure, right? We know larger islands are broken up into moku. Yeah, so many of you drive around Maui or wherever, and you can look on a sign. You see signs on the road, the various moku. Yeah, so we think about the land sections. Again, these are still being used to this day. What are smaller land sections within the moku, and generally these were where people would have resided in traditional times, ancient times. So we look at history, right? We talk about Captain Cook, arrives in 1778. Now, he's the first known, recognized, written, accounted for a European to come to these islands. If you should understand, I don't use the word discovery because people were already here. Yeah. But prior to Captain Cook, we've had several. You can find several stories of people, non-Kanaka, non-Hawaiians, who made it here and eventually blended in with the peoples. There's a famous one in Ke'e, in Kona. There's one Kukanaloa in Waihe'e, Maui, and so several landings. So there was definite people who came here prior to Cook, but Captain Cook is kind of given the recognition. In fact, the Spanish are said to have visited here, and in fact, the idea that even Captain Cook had a Spanish map, which guided him to come to Hawaii for the first time. One of the things when Captain Cook comes to Hawaii, because he had been in the Pacific, he was very, very aware culturally and even linguistically, and how to deal with so-called Polynesians. And he's very familiar, for example, with Tahiti, which is the closest in many ways with people of Hawaii. And so he was able to communicate. And he even talks about Hawaiians as being, wow, he was shocked to realize, wow, really, this is one and the same people. And in fact, if we're one and the same people, this would make us pretty much the largest, spatially, the largest nation on this earth. One of the things he describes, and no people could trade with more honesty than these people, never once attempting to cheat us, either shore or along the side of the ships. And in fact, when Captain Cook arrives, right, these are things that hopefully he learned in Hawaiian Studies 107, he's amazed at what he sees. He had never seen places like this in the world. Again, people forget that Hawaii was basically like a garden from the top of the mountains to the ocean. We had aquaculture, yeah, we had fish ponds galore, running fresh water. We had gardens of wetland taro patches and dryland taro patches, huge breadfruit farms. Everywhere he went, he was amazed at the capacity of food. And he also describes how healthy he saw the people and how clean, in fact, it's nothing he noticed our people were. In other words, we didn't have any homeless and hungry people in Hawaii at that point. An important piece I want you to pay attention to, and when you watch the film, act of war, pay attention to the population, yeah, or the so-called depopulation. Now, in this image here, it's not the best, but I could find one was, if you look, it started at 700,000, but, most to the estimates run between 800,000 and a million. In fact, yeah, there are some that go over a million when you actually study and look at the infrastructure of land here. When you start to look at like agricultural fields and you start to count how many people could be fed, you realize there were a lot of people living in these islands being fed by the land. But today, many of us use numbers like 800,000 as a common number to describe what the population of the Hawaiian Islands was in 1778. But as you look quickly, you can see if we use 800,000, make it simple, we can see, we know as it comes down, by 18, and see right about here, 1826, 1827, if I remember right, they're down to about 187,000. Think about that. From 800,000 to 187,000. Wait, in less than 25 years, they go from 187,000 to 80,000. I mean, more than half disappear. And from 1850 to 1890, we went from 80,000, again in 40 years, from 80,000 to 40,000, another 50% depopulation. So literally, we started with 800,000 in 1778, and by 1890, there were about 40,000. In other words, there was a 95% drop of population, or if you think of it this way, for every 20 that were here in 1778, only one survived by 1890. Yeah, so 1 out of 20 survival. Now, in our stories, let's go moving on through history. Yeah, we always talk about Kamehameha, and again, I'm just reviewing quickly. United the islands through warfare, and in his unification of the islands, he becomes not just the chief of Hawaii Island, but now he's a chief of Kauai Island, the whole empire. 1810, he solidified this by taking control of Kauai by sending his wife Kahumanu there, and Kauai cedes the authority there, and so the Hawaiian kingdom is solidified. There's also a lot of people don't realize that during this period, with his relations with Captain Vancouver from the time of Captain Cook and later on Vancouver revisits, he actually cedes the Hawaiian Kingdom to Great Britain as a protectorate. So for a period, a short period of time, the Hawaiian Kingdom was in fact under the protection of Great Britain. And in fact, many times when you see some of the royalty or the ali'i like Kamehameha, even his son Liolio, you'll notice in their clothing that they're using British attire or like that, that fancy red military attire. And that's because they saw themselves as part of the British Empire. And in fact, if you look at the Hawaiian flag, you'll notice that the Hawaiian flag today, the Hawaiian Kingdom flag, is very, very similar. If you look up British East India Company, you'll notice the British East India Company is virtually the same as the Hawaiian Kingdom flag, except the stripes are not red, white, and blue, but just red and white. Yeah. He does a kalai aina, means he does a distribution of the land and wealth. Yeah. So in his Hawaiian kind of feudalistic system, yeah, where he is in control of all the lands, he redistributes all these properties of the whole island kingdom. He also designates what comes the Kanawai Ma Malahoa, or the so-called land of the splintered paddle, which basically protects the lives of all Kanaka, all people as they traverse and move upon the land, and basically allows people to move and stay upon the land without being hurt, or as the word they use, molested, being harmed. And in fact, he said, Heva no make. If someone harms you, the punishment is death, capital crime. Now, what's interesting for some of you, if you go and look at the Hawaii State Constitution for today, I'm talking 2025, and you will see Kanawai Mamalahoa, in fact, is still part of the Hawaiian Kingdom, the Hawaii State Constitution. Now, when Kamehameha dies, his son, his eldest and highest ranking son, is actually not his eldest, but his highest ranking son, Liho Liho, takes the throne, and you can see him in the royal red, again, the British red. Him and his wife Kamamalu will reign. He is the head of the state. He's the head of the so-called Hawaiian Kingdom. His mother, and I should clarify, not his biological mother, but his mother who basically raises him, but she is another wife of Kamehameha, his father. Um, she is named the co-ruler. Originally prime minister, I guess would be the word. And you can still see very closely in the Hawaiian Kingdom, it's very much a copy of the British system. Yeah, where you have the so-called the royal family, and then you would have the prime minister. So this is how the Hawaiian Kingdom ran. Yeah, Kahumanu, in other words, ran the government. Well, unfortunately, while they're on a trip to England to visit King George the Fifth, I believe at that time, they contract measles, and him and his wife pass away there. Yeah. Well, during that period, another important event happens right after, before Lihuliho dies, is what's called the Ainoa. And the Ainoa is really with the breaking of the so-called kapu system. And the Ainoa is a very important piece because this is where you have kind of the old religion goes to battle against the new forces of the Kahuman, who basically have guns and cannons. And in a huge battle called the Ainoa battle in Kona, the traditionalists are defeated, and a huge changeover in society. There's a void, in fact, in the system of religion. And a couple system is overthrown. And I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to continue on, starting off with 1820, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, ABCFM. Okay, see you guys real soon.